Are you struggling to come up with original content week in and week out? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients, let them talk about what they care about most, and never run out of content ideas again. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Martin Gontovnikas. He is the VP of Marketing and Growth at Auth0, but his friends call him Gonto. So Gonto, how are you doing today, man?
All good. What about you?
I am doing fantastic. Really appreciate you coming on the show. We're going to be talking about what our folks in marketing can learn from their counterparts in product and how we can apply really product principles to marketing. But before we get into that, Gonto, I would love for you to share with listeners a little bit about yourself and what you and the team at Auth0 are up to these days.
Sure. So as you said, everybody calls me Gonto. So if you call me Martin, I might not turn. I'm sorry about that. I'm the VP of Marketing here at Auth0. However, I would say I'm not your typical marketer because I was an engineer. I studied systems engineering, and then by building open source frameworks, I realized that it was more fun for me making them popular rather than building them myself. So I ended up switching to what I call now the dark side, which is marketing. And then at Auth0, what Auth0 does is we provide you, it's a SaaS that provides you with authentication, authorization as a service. So if you want to add authentication to your web or mobile app with either username and password or social connections like Facebook, Twitter, or enterprise connections like Active Directory, ADFS, etc., instead of implementing it by yourself, you can use Auth0 and have all of those problems solved for you.
Oh, I love it. I hate when I sign up for a new app or a new program and I have to create a new profile. I'm like, why can't I just use my Google authentication all the time? So you're telling me you're helping brands and companies avoid that friction part of the experience that I'm dealing with and kind of frustrated with at times.
Exactly. What we try to do is to create a good mix of end user experience, security, and privacy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of the trifecta there that you need to nail all three, definitely. Well, it's really interesting, Gonto, that you say you switched over to the dark side in marketing. We literally had on yesterday Chad Sanderson of Value Selling Associates, and he had a background in marketing, communications, PR, and then switched to what he called the dark side, being he moved over to sales. So it's all kind of a perspective thing, I guess. But for your engineering and your product folks, maybe, marketing is the dark side. But what we're going to be talking about is in that transition, what lessons learned that you brought over to what you call the dark side in marketing. So really, you break that down into three specific ways. And the first is focusing on that there's no silver bullet. Tell us a little bit more about this when it comes to applying product principles to marketing, Gonto.
Yeah, so something that was fascinating to me is that when I started doing marketing, I knew nothing about marketing. So to me, it was around, okay, let's do some research and learn. And every marketer I was talking to, they had their own silver bullet. Like, you need to do Facebook ads, and then that's going to work for B2B. Or you need to focus on SEO and content, and that's going to kick ass. And I don't think there's a particular silver bullet. And I think that something you can learn from the product principles of research is, what if we actually first understand our target market? So one of the first things that we did at Auth0 when we started focusing on developers was actually interview developers to ask them, hey, like, when are you looking for authentication? Like, how do you search for authentication solutions? Is it online? Do you talk for a friend? what things are you interested in learning regarding authentication? What devices do you use to learn? Do you use the computer? Do you use the mobile phone? What applications? And based on that, I think you can start tapping into some of these people's habits. So for example, something that we learned is that for developers, we saw that some of our competition was creating landing pages for what is single sign-on and explaining some identity concepts. However, when we talk to the developers, what we learned is that they do not want to learn about authentication. They want to work on some things that for them are more fun, which are the business logic. So because of that, they were only looking for authentication when they were stuck or blocked and they needed to implement authentication into their apps. So when we started targeting that in Google, that started working, for example. However, for product managers, it wasn't the same thing. For some of the product managers that we talked in the Fortune 1000 companies, what they were saying is they don't, for example, what they want to learn about, which is like they do want to learn about how to increase conversion rates for their users or customer experience, but they didn't spend that much time looking online. They spent more time like researching and learning from product tanks, which are like global meetups or Mind the Product conference. So we started investing in some of those conferences. So to me, to sum it up, it's all about there's no silver bullet of one thing that you need to do in marketing, but it's rather more on doing qualitative research into your target market, understanding their habits, and then tapping into those habits to show the product or what you're doing.
Yeah, I love that. So you start from your buyer and really work backwards, doing those interviews to see what comes to the surface and really challenge your assumptions, much like you're doing when you're building new product. And the next phase is really about experimenting. So once you have some new hypotheses that are really founded more in feedback from your target market rather than just hunches that you might have, like you said before, tell us a little bit about how you approach marketing like a product engineer in this experimentation phase.
So something that to me is really important here is that you have to define a very clear experiment. And by that, I mean, okay, what is going to be the scope? Like what things are you going to do? How much time are you going to wait? What is the KPI or the key performance indicator? And what is the goal for that KPI that will tell you whether you are going to succeed or fail? So for example, going back to the example that I mentioned before, once we saw that developers were looking for authentication content when they get blocked, we decided we were going to try an experiment, which was 3 pieces of content. We were going to wait 1.5 months maximum. And then that content was going to be focused on if you get blocked, implement the authentication, how you can then implement that using Auth0. And the target metric was signups. And we wanted the sign-up growth to be 30% versus the baseline that we had. So we ran the experiment and it failed. So we didn't get to the sign-up number. However, when we deeper to understand why, what we saw is that we did get more page views, but those page views were from returning users. So again, we went again to do some qualitative interviews. And what we learned is that the people who were interested in understanding how to unblock their problems with Auth0 were already users of Auth0, and we wanted to target others. So based on that, we set another experiment to write about, okay, if you get blocked doing authentication for AngularJS, which is a framework, then this is how you implement it by yourself. And then we write like a small aside in one paragraph, hey, if you don't want to do this, you can just do it with Auth0. And that's when it actually worked. So to me, the important part is be good at setting the experiment framework, which is how much time, what is the scope of what you are going to do, what is the KPI and what is the goal, and make sure that if it succeeds, of course, double down. But if it fails, do the extra effort of going there and learning, because that might give you another experiment, which might actually be the experiment that works.
All right, today's growth story revolves around search engine marketing. And we'll be shining the spotlight on Aegis Software, a company that makes software for manufacturing operations. Aegis was one of the first companies in their space to invest in search marketing, but as competition grew, their performance plateaued. To counter this, they hired Directive Consulting, the B2B search marketing agency. With unparalleled experience in inbound lead gen for B2B companies, Directive was able to increase Aegis's monthly online leads by 457%. while at the same time lowering their cost per lead by 147%. Now I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
Really, the common theme here is, remembering that, much like on the product side, the most expensive thing you can do is build, right? And so you need to do as much research and as much testing before you, quote unquote, build too much on the marketing side, just like your product counterparts look at things, right?
Yes, 100%. And that's something you can see everywhere. So, for example, now when we're trying, we want to do a new messaging framework, and changing the whole messaging framework of Auth0 is a huge project, because that means we might need to change the home and the navigation and landing pages. So, building takes a lot of effort, both in product as well as in marketing. So, what we are thinking about is, okay, how can we make sure that when we get to build, it's something that is going to work out? And part of that is, okay, what are the experiments how can we experiment about the risks? And for example, for messaging, the risks can be like people don't get it, or it doesn't click with X persona, or this happens. So what we ended up doing is we ended up listing what are the risks of the messaging framework not working, and then doing both qualitative interviews as well as A/B testing in some landing pages with some copy to understand how it was hitting like the bottom line. And then we iterated based on that. And then when we actually moved to, okay, this is the new messaging we'll use in the entire site, we already were pretty sure that it was going to work based on all of the tests that we've done in the past. So to sum up, my rule would be, once you start defining your experiments and once you start defining what you want to do, make sure that you try to minimize the risk by canceling them and doing activities before you actually go and build it out.
Yeah, because when you do them at a smaller scale, there's less time to build it. There's less time and there's less associated risk if you're not getting it right. You might see lower page views, but on that one landing page versus throughout, your entire site, right?
Exactly, 100% right.
Yeah, I love this systematic approach that you've brought to, quote unquote, the dark side of marketing, Gonto, as you've moved from engineering and the product side to the marketing side. Any other lessons that you think that, for B2B marketers out there to put on their product hat for a moment, start to think like their product counterparts and how they can apply that to marketing? We've talked about, really challenging your assumptions, doing qualitative research, experimenting, and then making sure that when you do those experiments, that you do them in ways that are low risk and you build out less until you've really tested it. Anything else you would add to those three takeaways today?
I don't think so. I think those are the main takeaways. My only last comment is, right now, there is a way, even if it's a qualitative interview or even if it's like a website with A/B testing, there's usually a way to measure things. So I would focus on starting to measure more. I believe that I don't think we need, of course, marketing leads the creative and the branding part, but marketing in the past has been so towards that and that idea instead of more mathematical, data-driven things, that I believe that now it's time to start moving more to a data-driven marketing. I always say that marketing is not what it used to be, where before it used to be like Mad Men, where he had the whiskey, the cigar, and he was like, it's the new messaging that we're going to do. So I think that times are changing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have so many tools at our fingertips to be able to do that. And it just takes that mindset. I know, many intelligent marketers that I talk to on a daily basis on this podcast and offline are trying to go in that direction, trying to be more data-driven in their approach. And I think the mindset and the methodologies that you unpacked here today, Gonto, will help a lot of people be able to do that more effectively. So I really appreciate you sharing that on the show today. If anybody listening to this would like to stay connected with you, reach out, ask any follow-up questions, kind of pick your brain as someone from the engineering side who is now running a marketing team, what's the best way for people to find you or stay in touch?
So there are two main ways. One is you can go to my website, which is gon.to, so Gonto, but it's gon.to. And you can reach out through the contact form there. Otherwise, you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter is mgonto, so MGONTO.
I love it. Well, Gonto, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. This has been a great conversation.
Same here. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks you for inviting.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.